As the days passed, the emotional toll on Sheikh Hamdan continued to deepen. The failure to stop Hadia's wedding haunted him, leaving him questioning his own decisions. His thoughts often drifted back to that moment when he spoke to Hadia, on the phone. The pain in her voice, the sadness she carried, it all felt like a weight pressing on his heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had let her down when she needed him most. Shama, sensing the ongoing turmoil within Sheikh Hamdan, tried her best to provide comfort and reassurance. She knew that he was struggling with more than just the failure of the mission. Sheikh Hamdan had always been a man of action, someone who believed that when a problem arose, he could find a solution. But this situation had left him feeling powerless. He couldn't change Hadia's fate, and that was something he could not easily accept. Shama's presence in his life had always been a source of stability, and now more than ever, she stood by him. Despite her own personal disappointments and frustrations with their relationship, she put those aside to be there for him. She didn't need to say much. Her understanding and silent support were enough. And though Sheikh Hamdan appreciated her compassion, a part of him couldn't help but feel torn. He was thankful for Shama's unwavering loyalty, but his mind was still consumed with thoughts of Hadia, of the woman he had always cared for, but never fully understood. One evening, as Sheikh Hamdan sat in the quiet of his office, he found himself reflecting on the past few weeks. He had tried so hard to protect Hadia, to shield her from a life that she didn't want. But in the end, his efforts had been in vain. His mind wandered back to when they had first met, to the way they had built their lives together. Their marriage, despite its eventual end, had been filled with moments of deep connection. And now, here he was, stuck in the aftermath, unable to escape the sadness that lingered in the air. But he knew that he couldn't keep dwelling on the past. As much as it pained him, Hadia had made her choice, and there was nothing he could do to undo what had been done. The real question now was what lay ahead. What was next for Hadia, now that she had committed to this forced marriage? Would she find happiness? And what about Sheikh Hamdan? How could he move on from the heartbreak that had consumed him? Shama, noticing that Sheikh Hamdan had become more withdrawn in recent days, decided to take matters into her own hands. She called him and suggested that they spend some time together, away from the pressures of their respective lives. It was a simple gesture, but it was exactly what Sheikh Hamdan needed at that moment. For the first time in days, he agreed. They spent the evening talking, not about Hadia or their own troubles, but about anything and everything. It was a welcome distraction from the whirlwind of emotions that had overwhelmed him for so long. But as much as Shama tried to help him heal, there was one thing that still haunted Sheikh Hamdan. The thought that Hadia was now someone else's wife. The image of her wedding, her departure into a life she hadn't chosen, lingered in his mind. It seemed like such a tragic ending to their story. He had never wanted her to be unhappy, and yet here she was, trapped in a marriage she didn't want. Meanwhile, Hadia's life had taken a different turn. The reality of her forced marriage weighed heavily on her. She had tried to convince herself that she could make the best of the situation, that she would find a way to live in peace and raise her children. But deep down, she knew that this was not the life she had envisioned for herself. She had wanted freedom. Freedom from the constraints of a marriage that was never her choice, and now she was living in the shadow of that choice. Though Hadia's new husband was a cousin, the love between them had never existed. Their bond was based on familial obligation, not affection. And as the days passed, Hadia found herself growing more and more distant from him. She couldn't bring herself to love him. The emotional toll of the forced marriage weighed on her, leaving her feeling isolated and alone. At night, when the house grew quiet, Hadia would often think about what could have been. She thought about Sheikh Hamdan, the man who had always been there for her, who had cared for her deeply. She thought about the life they could have had if circumstances had been different, but those thoughts brought her little comfort. She was where she was, and there was no turning back. Yet, despite everything, Hadia knew she had to find a way to move forward. She had children to care for, a new life to build, and the weight of her own emotions to manage. The sadness she felt in her heart was overwhelming. But she couldn't let it control her. She couldn't let her regrets define her future. As the weeks passed, Sheikh Hamdan and Hadia found themselves. Shama, meanwhile, found herself at a crossroads as well. She had stood by Sheikh Hamdan through his pain and heartache, but she couldn't ignore the feelings that had been building between them. She had always cared for him, and despite the complicated nature of their relationship, she was beginning to wonder if there could be a future for them. She knew that Sheikh Hamdan's heart was still tied to Hadia, but she also knew that life had a way of moving on, and sometimes people needed to let go of the past to embrace what was in front of them. The question now was whether Sheikh Hamdan would be able to let go of his heartache and move forward, or whether he would remain stuck in the past, forever haunted by the choices he had made. And what about Hadia? Would she ever find happiness in her new life, or would she forever be trapped in the sadness of a forced marriage? The answers to these questions were uncertain, but one thing was clear: the story was far from over. So, my dear viewers, what do you think will happen next? Will Sheikh Hamdan and Shamma find a way to move forward, or will his past with Hadia continue to haunt him? Will Hadia ever find peace in her new life, or will she continue to struggle with her choices? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your theories are always so intriguing, and I love reading them. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel for more updates, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Hello, my dear viewers. Welcome back to the channel, where we bring you the latest updates on Sheikh Hamdan and his family. Today's story is filled with emotions, heartbreak, and unexpected twists, so I'm sure you're going to want to hear every word. In my last video, I shared that Sheikh Hamdan's ex-wife, Hadia Zen, was preparing for her upcoming wedding in England. The twist? Hadia was about to marry her own cousin, but this wasn't a love marriage. It was an arranged marriage, one that was being pushed by family obligations. And what made the situation even more complicated was the fact that Hadia had no desire to go through with it. In fact, Hadia made it clear to Sheikh Hamdan that she did not want this marriage to happen at all. Sheikh Hamdan, of course, wasn't someone to stand by and watch someone he cared for suffer. He received a heartfelt letter from Hadia, one that left him deeply saddened. In the letter, Hadia expressed her sorrow over the upcoming wedding, explaining that she had no love in her heart for her cousin. She revealed that, instead of entering into a marriage she didn't want, Hadia simply wanted to live her life, independently, taking care of her children. But most importantly, Hadia made a request. She didn't want Sheikh Hamdan to remarry her, as many might have thought. Instead, she asked for his help in stopping this arranged marriage. Sheikh Hamdan, upon reading the letter, felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. It pained him to think that Hadia was being forced into a situation that would make her unhappy. But as deeply as he cared for her, he also had his own personal matters to deal with. At the time, his relationship with his girlfriend, Shama Al-Falasi, was facing some difficulties. Despite this, Sheikh Hamdan knew what he had to do. He needed to help Hadia, regardless of what it might mean for his own personal life. Without wasting any time, Sheikh Hamdan called Shama. They met at her mansion, and he shared the contents of Hadia's letter with her. Shama, shocked by the revelation that Hadia was being forced into a marriage, immediately told Sheikh Hamdan to do whatever it took to stop the wedding. She told him to help Hadia without hesitation. After their conversation, Sheikh Hamdan left to head to his office, but his mind wasn't on his work. He couldn't stop thinking about Hadia and her desperate situation. He knew he had to act quickly, but he didn't know how. His thoughts were consumed with what steps he could take to prevent the wedding from going forward. After much contemplation, Sheikh Hamdan made the decision to reach out to Hadia's father. He dialed the number, and after a few rings, Hadia's father picked up. Sheikh Hamdan, as calmly as he could, explained Hadia's feelings, that she did not want to marry her cousin, and that she felt forced into a situation that didn't align with her desires. He thought that perhaps her father would understand, and together they could find a way to stop the wedding. But instead of understanding, Hadia's father became furious. He yelled at Sheikh Hamdan, telling him that this was none of his business. The call was abruptly ended,